Hello AAD, my name is Iris. I'm the director of the Württembergischer Kunstverein together with Hans de Christ. We have a long relationship with South Korean artists. It started actually in 2004 when Hans Christ, my colleague, was co-curator of Media City Seoul. And with this was starting a long exchange. We had been there very often. We started and founded sort of network. And since then, there had been many artists that we invited here, but we did also projects there. So I think it was 2006, we had, for example, a huge solar exhibition by Sun Taek-no. South Korean artists had been always part of our program. One part of this huge project on Yeosung Gukgeuk was presented also some years ago in our exhibition. And Hans himself, he was in the jury of the Hermes Award, and this is how he got to know the work of Siren, and especially this project. So it's a long-term relationship, and we are always very interested in the social political context of art, and we are also very much interested in artists who are working in the context of artistic research, and that's of course something that is very crucial in the work of Siren. I mean, first and foremost for us is actually very much interesting the point that with and through Yeosung Gukgeuk, Siren tries to narrate a sort of origin of queer forms of cultural articulation from that genre, and trying to construct or to build up a narration on queerness which is not based in Western Europe or North America, which is really based on South Korea and on Asian traditions. And for us, I think we should learn about this, that they are not only Western discourses about what queerness means. This is not all about Judith Butler and these people, but so that we start to get to learn from queer cultural practices that come from other spaces and corners of the world. And that's actually very interesting to us. On the one hand, there is a lot to learn about Yeosung Gukgeuk and about experiences of people of the generation that are probably 80 or 90 today, about their personal history, about their history as female, as queer people. So there's a lot to explore. And then also this is the content, but there's also a lot to explore regarding the methodologies of Siren, the way she, in a very critical manner, deals with archives, for example, like cross-reading, or I even would say it's a sort of anti or post-archive. And for me, for example, there's one very impressive video which for me very much represents her way of dealing with archives. It's called Dust. And so she goes at the home of one of that former Yeosung Gukgeuk actors. And this woman starts to, she in the beginning says, no, there's no material, we have no documents, and all what I have is very boring, I want to get rid of it. But once she starts to tell her story, she little by little starts to put all that material on the desk in a sort of random but also associative way. And so you see how, in a combination of her speech, of her talking, and her body movements, how that map, this map starts to show whole cosmology of Yeosung Gukgeuk. And I think that's pretty much the way how Siren herself understands the archive. And that's for me something very interesting and very special also on the way she works. And then also how all the transformation processes which are part in her work, like taking something which comes from theater, bringing to video, bringing it back to the theater, bringing it to the exhibition place. So there are all these transformations. And now is the very final part of the theater trilogy, so the Resistance Theater, also the city comes in, which for us is also very interesting. Yeah, and she never forgot to relate the history of Yeosung Gukgeuk to the present. You know? She always connected it to very young and contemporary cultural practices of the queer communities. So I think that's also very, very important aspect, and the same how she deals with tradition. So that she's very interested, like in the tradition of Yeosung Gukgeuk, which itself already was referring to music traditions of the 17th and 19th century, but always with the idea not to preserve it as it was, but to translate it into contemporary agencies, and that's very important. And even in the new piece, where it's about the demonstration and the culture and the grammars and the rhythms of demonstrations, you have with this one music group, you have again this relationship to tradition and its translation into contemporariness. So that's very interesting. And of course nowadays all local art is also globally connected. So, but first and foremost, we thought it's interesting to bring a very specific local context, because the new work, of course, is related to the martial law conflict in 1924 in South Korea. But of course, this was something that we saw here in the media as well. And I personally am very impressed by the protest culture of South Korea. You managed already 2 impeachment cases, which were successful. So I always think learning by South Korea, no, in terms of resistance and protest culture. So the space was very much, of course, in dialogue with us, but it was very much designed by Siren herself. When she came the first time, she saw the space, was looking at it for several days, and then she said, I'm going to make something completely different than I planned. And then she saw that huge space, which looks like a square. So she organized it so that you have an empty center. The empty center, which is directly in front of this huge, giant screen where her new piece Six Soul is projected, that it somehow refers to places of assembly, no? to a public space, and at the same time it's surrounded by curtains, and you have this little platform. It all refers, of course, to theater as something which is on the base of the Yeosung Gukgeuk project. But I see it in this setup also as a reference to the public space, as the very much choreographed space. No, it's actually cities are also theater props in a certain way. And if you see, and I think that this new piece, the Six Soul, is very much also talking about the city, about that constant building site in Seoul, about these architectures of power on the one hand, but also of the areas that are more driven by precariousness. So, and the way how she interweaves the records of the demonstrations with the reenactments of the demonstrations with the city. This so the city aspect is quite present. So I think that. So the architecture of the exhibition itself refers to the theatricality of cities, and yet also that people take the city, like in the video, as a platform, as a stage for their voice, right? So it has very many complex layers, and in her development of the exhibition, she did not only refer to the architecture, but also to some aspects of our ways of working. And one of it is recycling. So a lot of material that we use, like for example the curtains, they are coming from an exhibition of Alexander Kluge. But so all these elements have seen already other exhibitions. But she was very fascinated. And at the same time, we are using our spaces very much as shared spaces. That means when people need a space to meet or to present something, they can ask and then they can have it for free. So this gesture is also part of the scenery of the exhibition. So there is this empty stage, but it's not only an empty gesture. I love it, and people are very impressed. The Stuttgart Press said it's the exhibition of the year. Yeah, I mean, so we are kind of regularly invite artists which offer us queer perspectives, trans perspectives from the LGBTQIA communities or other so-called marginalized groups. You say du salam? Yes. That's how you, okay. No, that's enormously interesting for us, of course, because there was this period in the 60s and 70s when South Korean people were sent to Germany. So the men were all going to the minor areas to have these very heavy and dangerous and really ugly jobs, and the women all came as cheap workers in the care area. And this is actually something which still happens a lot, but nowadays these people come from Poland, for example, so it's just shifted the way from where people are coming, but it's still that sort of economy. So it's very interesting. Also, some years ago we had been nearby Namhae, and you have there this German village which they built for all those workers when they came back to Korea. And we were wondering so much because probably they were homesick and they wanted to get back to Korea, but then they came into the German village where you could buy sausage and you would have an Oktoberfest, which was kind of weird for us, but still this museum was interesting for us. It's the first time that we got more information about that period when all these workers came to Germany and were quite important also for the South Korean economy. And so the history of these two women is connected to this. So they came here to Germany to work, and then they get to know each and to love each other, and they are still living in Berlin. And I'm very grateful that they also will make all their way to come here and to tell about their experiences as migrant lesbian person in their age and how that was. I'm very, very curious. And it's interesting because we also showed, this is from a very young lesbian couple that is related to the Art Academy, that's Jerry and Hanseo. And they are telling their story. It's kind of similar story, but they were born in the 90s. So I'm very interested how that can be related and how we can make a sort of intergenerational dialogue out of this. And this is something which I also see very much in the heart of the work of Siren, right? Because you see, it's all also about age, about the fluidity of age, the transformation of age through masquerade. You know, that's something which for me is very present, but also this incredible care about an older generation. So, yeah. No, and actually the Koreans who are here, living here, because we told that Siren is coming, that you are coming, they are very happy to have a more South Korean public now these days. They are really, really happy about that. This is why we also made the whole public program together with them, so that there is a sort of connection between this exhibition, but also with what they are doing. And through the great funding of CAMS, we could invite Siren and Kirara already last year, and when they had a public talk and later on this performance from Kirara, it was here packed, and they were only South Korean, very young people, so it was a completely, we had a translator, but we said we don't need it, because no. So it was enormous, and yeah, I'm really convinced that any art that I think is interesting and is serious has an emancipatory, and this is for me, that means a political aspect. It just is because it can be something that is maybe for economical relationships, it may be meaningless, but because of that, it has an important meaning. So for me, and also I'm convinced that art gives you a space of action, of agency, and of speech, which you don't have in language. It's very specific. It's specific to dance. It's specific to different cultural expressions. That this allows you to, to have tones in between that language cannot capture. So that's for me, and it has the potential to see the world different than it is. So to share that maybe things how they are not necessarily how they are, so that we can imagine them to being different. And that's for me something very powerful about art, and especially also in the case of Siren, like and I would just encourage. Thank you. 감사합니다.